I'm Paul Duckworth. I'm a tax partner at Smith Williamson, and I'm going to try and save you some money today. I'm trying to get you some money back through an R&D tax relief credit. You'll be pleased to hear I won't be asking you to land your private jet on the Isle of Man, so you hopefully shouldn't be appearing on Panorama. Personally, I'm not a fan of Mrs. Brown's Boys. I much prefer The Apprentice. But this is not aggressive tax planning. This is nothing like that. This is very straightforward. So what's it all about? I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, by the way, so not very long. Please don't leave, because there's not enough of you anyway. I have to put a little caveat in. This is really just to say, as much as what I say is accurate and correct, you can't rely on it. So please don't take any action or any inaction, because we will not be held responsible. So what's R&D tax relief? What is it all about? There have been 26,000 claims last year. So it's obviously something that companies are interested in. However, only 3% was in the construction and real estate. Now, I think that's because individuals in that sector are just not aware what they're doing qualifies for this relief. Pretty much similar to if we roll the clock back about 10 years, manufacturers didn't think they qualified. And now manufacturers form up the bulk of R&D tax relief claims. What is R&D? The magic bit. This is a really boring way to describe R&D tax relief, but this is what's on the revenue websites and everything else. And this is the core understanding. It's you have to have an advance. So you must be doing something new. So the engineers must be creating a new bit of technology or a new bit of science. And science is just the application of our environment. So looking at a bit of mud, trying to work out how you can do something in it a bit more efficiently, because it includes improving a process. The then difficult bit, and this is the bit we talk to HMRC about, is there have to be some uncertainties. There has to be something that you haven't encountered before. Now that is more common than you would think. So it's worth, for SMEs, which are most companies in here, so if you've got less than 500 staff, you're probably an SME, it's worth an extra 130%. So if you can identify £100,000 of expenditure that qualifies for R&D, you're getting back nearly an extra £25,000 straight into the bottom line, straight into distributable reserves. So if you're the owner, that's an extra bit of dividend you could take out if you qualify for R&D tax relief. But where should you be looking? And I'm going to run through examples, because I think rather than me just talking through the legislation, which personally I would love to do that, I know you probably wouldn't. I'm going to run through some examples, and hopefully you'll get a practical feel for when you might be able to benefit from this tax relief. So it's more on the engineering side. So civil engineering particularly. If you're building a tunnel, you know, the Hindhead Tunnel, which was probably 10 years ago now, you know, that was one of the longest tunnels that was made, and there were some real challenges in that. I think it still floods now and again. It's nearly always closed when I go up there. Even building roads. So if you've got to build some access roads, it's not always the same building one road as it is when you build the next road. It depends what the environment is that you're building it in. So that can give you some challenges. Similarly, with bridges, architects, all that sort of stuff, and even houses. We have done R&D tax relief claims where people have been building houses, and I'll give you a practical example on that. What I'm going to do is run through 5 questions, because if you're the owners of your business and you want to know whether you're doing R&D, I mean, maybe you've got quite a few employees, these are the 5 magic questions you need to ask the engineers, as it were, out on site. So I am going to have to break the cardinal rule of PowerPoint and talk through some of these slides. So I've got to repeat the question. So question 1, does the project involve any technical challenges? Well, every time I speak to an engineer, they say, of course it's challenging, because, you know, that's why we're getting involved, that's why we're doing it. So question number 1 is, you know, is it straightforward? Is there something where best practice isn't quite there? Now, it could be that you've got a handbook. In fact, most engineers do. They say, yeah, I've got this handbook, but that's only more of a guide. And quite often, they still need to use their own ingenuity when it comes to the actual build, when they come to the design of something. So is it any technical challenges? Question 2 is, will you need to deduce, sorry, it sounds very horrible, doesn't it? Will you need to deduce solutions not readily available to solve the challenge? So this is if you're asked, and I'll put this in the simplest form as possible, to build right next to an old willow tree that's, 100 years old or so, it's got a protection order on it. How deep do you need to go? Do you need to deduce a solution based on there that isn't in the guidebook? Is it on Google? I probably shouldn't quote company names because I'm being recorded. Is it on the internet? Because if it's published on the internet, well, actually, if there's a willow and it's 100 years old and it's 100 foot tall, you've got to go down 4.5 meters. Then that's pretty straightforward. But if it's not on the internet, and actually there's a bit of flexibility because you've got a stream running nearby as well that floods every winter, does that give you a problem? Does that make it a bit more challenging? Question 3, so we're nearly halfway there. Have you increased your knowledge? This is the easy bit. If you did the hard work, if you wrapped the cold towel around your head to get a solution on this build, have you learned something that you can take to the next project? And if the answer is yes, then you've increased knowledge. You've increased the awareness of those problems. So that's a massive plus when it comes to R&D tax relief. And then we've got question 4, is it setting new standards in your field? We all love to be published if we can, to write an article. If what you did was something that you can brag about and say, yeah, we've done this. Look at the shard. We did this, Is it setting new standards? The chances are maybe, and it's not a test in isolation. But if the answer is yes, it's a definite you're getting into this R&D. And the last question, which we very rarely come across, is was the project halted or stopped because of the technical difficulties? Normally, the project changes. It just morphs a little because of technical difficulties sometimes. It doesn't actually stop. But if you sometimes have to change what your original plan was, then this could put the work you're doing into qualifying for R&D tax relief. And remember, that's that extra 130% deduction. So the overall test is you must face, and I'm going to read this out, I'm afraid, you must face a technical or scientific, more often it's scientific challenge, and it's not readily solvable by what's out in the market. And if you're ticking those boxes, you probably qualify for this extra tax relief, which could significantly improve your earnings. So I was going to run through some case studies. Anyone who's counting, you'll be pleased to hear I've only got 2 more slides, but it is going to take me more than 2 minutes. So I'm going to do some case studies just to put this in example. These are real live R&D claims that have gone in and the revenue have said, I agree with that, here, have some money back, have some tax back. The first one to run through is just underground beams in a railway. And it was actually I'm not entirely sure if it was a tube station, but it was the beams. They decided rather than just having them going straight in lines and building a roof like they'd always built a roof, they said, you know what, we've got new materials now, we can do this slightly differently. So they put the beams at different angles and then didn't need so much. They improved that process of that roof. There was a real cost saving. And the next time someone comes up, can we just all laugh at the right time as if I've told a joke? Because that would be really funny. No, sorry. So that was a new process. They improved the process with the roof and they got money back, which was great. New grouting on a chimney. Whenever I talk to people about grouting, they immediately think, oh, I've just got a new process for grouting the bathroom. But this was on a nuclear chimney. This was on a massive thing. And what they did is they said, do you know what, if we drill the holes at certain different spaces apart, that's quite clever because it means we don't need as much grout. So again, they improved the process of grouting this chimney, didn't use so much. And again, the revenue said, yes, that qualifies for R&D tax relief. Here's your money. The arch. I've had to put the arch because I didn't feel I could actually say the arch that it was. And as I'm being recorded, I really don't want to say what arch it was. But if you can imagine a stadium somewhere that has an arch, I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing. I feel like Darren Brown now, and I've got control. That arch, they claimed R&D tax relief on that because they did not know it was going to stand up until it stood up. They had it all laid down on the floor. They had all the bits and pieces done to it. And I've spoken to the chap who was involved, and he said, no, we didn't know it was going to work until we got it there. And if ever you're in that situation because the architects have gone mad, gone wild, and designed something that is quite fantastic, it could be that when you try and build it, that's what you're going to get. Not up there. We had another one, similarly. I'm going off script now. We had another one where it was a high residential property in London, and they wanted a swimming pool put in. And you don't really want to put a swimming pool in when you're on something like the 5th or 6th floor. But they got it. Well, they managed to design it right. They got permission. And it was all to do with the architects and the engineers going, look, this is what we've got to do. These are the safety features we need to have. And that got R&D tax relief. New process to remove waste. Now, this isn't just as much, specifically with carbon emissions. So this is the science bit. You know, forget technology. R&D isn't just all about technology. It covers science too. And sorry, that threw me. It shouldn't do. You can tell I don't do this professionally, can't you? The science bit, it was all about removing waste. Now, that wasn't just saying, let's use a lorry that's twice the size, you know, so we've got less carbon emissions. Because that's not really doing something that's difficult. There's no uncertainty there. But this was trying to improve the process so that they were reusing more waste. So when they were doing all the build, they were trying to reuse as much as possible, not just knocking things down and chucking it. It was they developed a process to reuse as much of that as possible, which gave them then less carbon emissions going into the environment, blah, blah, blah. And the revenue again said, here's the money. Roads near a wildlife nature reserve. So this was a particular case where there was a protected area, nature reserve. You can't just build a road straight through it, but the road needed to go nearby. And the engineers said to us, look, we can't just build it how we would build a road over there, you know, 10 miles away, because we've got to think about the nature reserve. We've got animal, wildlife impact with the environment. So they had to design the road and design the way to do it with as minimal impact on that nature reserve as possible. So they had to do it differently. They had to improve their process for building it, and that gave them the R&D tax relief claim. So, you know, even roads can qualify. Not every road, obviously. It doesn't work that way. But if you're in a strange environment affecting the ecosystem, if I use that phrase, you could claim. Floating houses. So this was a claim which was great. You might say, well, Holland has had floating houses for donkey's years, you know. But this was a UK company, and you may know it, so I will not mention its name, that designed floating houses. Took pretty much a standard design, so doing nothing new. But then they wanted to improve how often you needed to check the floating element, so when it went up the poles. And they designed a way that it wouldn't need to be checked every 12 months. I think they pushed it out to about every 2 years. And that process, amongst the whole structure, the revenue said, yeah, I can see you've improved this. You've done really well, and it's saved a lot further down the line. So therefore, you tick all the boxes. And if you tick the boxes, you get the tax relief claim. And the last one, which is probably the one where everyone looks at me and says, you're joking. Carpark drainage. You know, we've all got gutters. We know what drainage is. But this was a particular car park in London. It was very, very enclosed, and they couldn't use what they wanted to. You know, they said, this is the standard drainage system we would use. Didn't work, so they had to design something new. They had to design a process whereby it would all flow, and it wouldn't cause any problems, and it wouldn't flood into the office next door. And that design of that whole process improved the drainage capacity of this. So again, we're ticking the advance on technology. Nobody laughed. That was my time for the joke. So that was how they improved the car park drainage. That's my examples. I've got one last slide, which is very, very practical, because I'm probably out of time, which is when you make your claim to the tax office, include a narrative and make sure it sets out technically what you are doing. Forget the commercial. The revenue aren't interested. They want the technical bits. Break down the costs, because if you just say, I'm making a claim 100,000... No. If I said if you submit a claim and you just say, I've got £100,000 of costs, the revenue are more likely to inquire. And what you don't want is an inquiry, because it takes your time. You know, inquiries are not bad. We defend the claims we do. We're happy sitting around a table with the tax office. But if you can avoid having an inquiry, let's put the steps in place beforehand. So break the cost down, include a narrative, and confirm in that report that you've paid everybody you're meant to have paid. Because that's a change in practice in the last 3 or 4 months, where the revenue is saying, if you've not paid it, we're not going to give you relief. And we've seen inquiries on that now. That's the practical bit. If I was charging for that, that's probably worth a couple of £100 in its own right. But anyway, it's there. Please do that if you're making a claim. That is me done. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? So my personal view, and honestly, you should ask the people in this room rather than me. My personal view is this is a little bit of tax relief, you know, and we don't really worry about tax relief. We're all about making profits from getting planning permission. Yeah, and it's like, is it effort? But in practical terms, it's not a lot of effort. There is no prescribed format for making an R&D tax relief claim. You know, we know formats that the revenue like, and they help that. But in theory, you don't have to have timesheets. You don't have to break it down to that level of detail. You could, in theory, say, look, we've had a good chat, we've looked at what we've done, and we spend about 1 day a week doing this technical bit. And if you're spending 1 day a week doing the technical bit, that's 20% of your time. So if you're getting paid £100,000 a year, notice I kept the maths easy there, then that's £20,000 of eligible costs. You get your extra 25% of that, that's £5,000. Thank you very much. So that's my view, but I think other people may have a different view on that. Any other questions? Sorry, Brigitte works with me, so this is probably going to be a really tough question.
I'm not an R&D expert, so that's why I'm going to ask the question. You've given lots of examples on roads and arches and sort of big, almost like commercial buildings. What about, have you come across claims in blocks of flats, more sort of residential side of things, which may be relevant to some of the audience?
Yeah, so we don't get to do as many in residential, and I think it comes down to they're more interested in, we've got planning permission, let's build it, let's sell it, let's close it down. So it used to be, and I'm going to go off subject here now, that you'd always set up a new company to do property development, and then you'd close it down and you take the money out, you try and get your 10% entrepreneurs relief. If I'm saying anything you're not registering, just shout. So it was all about just minimizing your tax that way. So we don't see many claims for like a 1 or 2 off residential build. The bigger residentials we do, because they're normally bringing together 4 or 5 different owners of a field, and you've got all sorts of things that you've got to look at. But if you're just building one house, R&D tax relief is the least of your worries, really, or the least of your opportunities, I should say. Is that okay, Brigitte?
That's fine, Paul.
All right, thank you. So I'm hanging around for a bit anyway if there are any questions. Other than that, hopefully you learned something, and enjoy the rest of your day.